Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. On behalf of DTN and Devcom-Pakistan, I welcome you all the participants of today's webinar. That is a very important in nature, like what could be what could be Afghanistan after OIC, a conference that organized by Pakistan in Islamabad, and the 57 countries foreign ministers participated in it, and the main objective of the conference was to highlight the importance of and urgency of the humanitarian aid to Afghanistan that is suffering due to for food and health and other immediate needs. Meanwhile, UN Security Council convened its session, and they approved the resolution to help Afghanistan immediately. And the total estimate are about $41 billion needed for Afghanistan, and pledges were done about of $1 billion. And meanwhile, Pakistan has also started sending some aid to, and some other, some aid is also coming to Afghanistan. And I hope like miseries of the people of Afghanistan will start ending. And today, sorry for my sore throat. Today, we are here, and we have asked the experts from different neighboring countries to participate in it and see how Afghanistan would be after OIC conference, if there would be some change, and what could be the impact and the role of different countries. We are joined by Lieutenant General retired Muhammad Asad Durrani Sahab, former ISI chief and geopolitical analyst. He will be our keynote speaker, will be giving us the situation analysis. And then we have Ambassador retired Nagmana Hashmi Sahiba. She has been ambassador to China, and we would see like how she believes that China could have its role in the reconstruction and at the humanitarian crisis, and how she sees Pakistan's role in mobilizing neighboring countries. And then we will have Ambassador retired Rakesh Sood from India. He was the Indian ambassador to Afghanistan, and he would let us know like what could be the possible scenarios in Afghanistan, and the possible role that India can play in this humanitarian crisis. Then we would have Professor Dr. Ahmad Asal. He is running Middle Eastern Studies Center in Ankara. And we will have Abdullah Khanjani from Afghanistan. He is a former senior deputy minister for strategy and policy coordination, and he has also been a television show host, and he will let us know the situation and what could be the possible reaction of Taliban and the people of Afghanistan. And I believe he would be able to give us a real situation and feelings and emotions of Afghanistan. And then we have Dr. Sumaya Murawati. She is a research fellow South Asia and Afghanistan, and she is working with Tehran International Studies and Research Institute in Tehran. And last but not least, Zoon Ahmad Khan. She is a very well-known media person in China, and she is also research fellow of Center for China and Globalization in Beijing. And I welcome you all, the panelists and the participants for being with us, and those who are listening us on social media platforms. Thank you very much. Without any further delay, I would request Lieutenant General Asad Durrani Sahab, please go ahead and let us know Sorry, you are already, you have to unmute yourself, Asadurani Saab. Please go ahead.
Thank you very much, Malik Sahib. I have known OIC to some extent as ambassador in Saudi Arabia, and that was 1 year before 9/11 and 1 year after that. I was also Pakistan's permanent representative in OIC. Never found this organization doing any good to anyone, except one. If you have a problem taking a difficult decision, you can dump it on the OIC and you will never hear about it again. It happened many times, and that's why I was wondering, multinational organizations do have a problem because their decisions, especially on complex issues, have to be taken more or less by consensus. And that's why some earth-shaking decisions they normally do not take. They may condemn something, they may support something, but pretty watered down decisions can be taken on geopolitical matters. I used to therefore wonder why were we calling this conference when the need is to provide immediate relief to the suffering Afghans. Winters were coming, food was short, and that time to get the OIC conference here, don't mind if I call it a circus that goes around, to decide if we could do something immediately for the Afghans. Anyone who expected that to happen, I think I suggest one should not only see what such organizations are about, but should also get one's head examined. And the result was quite obvious. They've had this great gala show in Islamabad, and after that, the resolution they produced is probably unique in the sense that it talks about 34 different things that the OIC has resolved or hoped or recommended to do, except one. And in the presence of, that one, everything else boils down to nothing, zero. It didn't say it would act. If at all it said something, Wada Farda, in 3 months we will probably have an organization. By that time, the worst crisis that the Afghans have ever seen would hopefully be over because of other reasons that I'm going to talk about, not because of OIC, not because of Pakistan. So that was the first question that one had to ask oneself. Why are we inviting the OIC conference here? To what purpose? And then it started becoming clear why. And for that, you do not have to look at the crystal ball or even carry out an assessment. Like to go back 3 months after the new government in Afghanistan came to being, or you can go back 3 years if you like, ever since the present government came into being. Because in the meantime, we've had crisis. We've had one in Kashmir on the 5th of August, 2019, revocation of 370, Kashmiris besieged. And at that time, one expected that if nothing else, at least we will try and raise some hue and cry, and in fact try to mobilize humanitarian aid, nothing else, not the militants, not the infiltrators, but something on that line. But since we were not going to do it, we only prepared another map. We renamed the road, and of course made good speeches. That's what has been happening for the last 3 months. Ladies and gentlemen, we've been preparing for this period for the last about over 10 years. We knew one day American forces would leave and that the onus will be primarily on Pakistan, but also on a few other countries like Iran, China, Russia, Turkey joined in. That they are the ones who were positioning themselves, and my compliments to those people who were at the helm of the affair at that time in Pakistan. They were steering this mechanism. That once it will come to that, we will try and manage Afghanistan as best we know, as best we can do, knowing the complexity of the situation, and I don't have to talk about it. So no mobilization of that organization. We were not trying to manage things within Afghanistan. We were not also incorporating in Iran and China and others and working, in a coordinated manner, coordinating policies, trying to get, certain human things in. Instead, we were rationalizing inaction. That started with saying, well, first the Taliban would do that and then we will see. Recognition aside, we were also unwilling at that time to ask those NGOs who were actually waiting here for a long time that once this crisis comes, we will move in. Some people, if they have gone in, I believe one odd has, must have done it on its own. But there was no officially sponsored policy or a campaign to facilitate that. Some token support was sent by us, China probably a little more, and I think Uzbekistan probably also comes to my mind, and Qatar perhaps. Now, these are the people who were trying to do whatever they could, but either Pakistan on its own or collectively, that effort one did not see. On the other hand, as I said, at that time we were only saying, well, if you look after the human rights, we will see what we can do. If you did an exclusive government, I mean, how many countries have an exclusive government? Pakistan itself does not have one. But then we will do that. Lately, during this conference, another strange point came up. Since their banking channels are not functioning, we cannot provide any aid. One has known how the aid has gone into, especially Afghanistan, but in many other countries where we never used any banking channels, there were so many other ways of, sending emergency aid. We were not doing it. If that was what was happening, then one must try and consider as to why we were doing it, why this masterly inaction, leave aside OIC on part of Pakistan. And then one probably started seeing a couple of other developments. One of them was how we got paralyzed every time a big action was required, because we had FATF to face. We were depending on certain foreign aids. The IMF might not allow, and of course, the mighty United States might not be pleased. Time and again, one saw a concrete signal that on that basis, we just held back and did not do that. Even on the question of bases, one may have said here, we will not provide any basis for any military action in Afghanistan. But one also found that coincidentally, at the same time, some more action, some more work on the Sirabot, they started. So, question mark, what is it that for? Why are at this time, when we are facing financial crunch, why are we working on a base like this, which we don't think that we are going to use it ourselves in a foreseeable situation? And if that be so, then I suppose one will understand why we were hedging our bets, why we were needing the OIC cover to again rationalize our inaction. If that be so, let me say, ultimately, it's going to be the biggest loser will be Pakistan, not Afghanistan. Afghanistan will muddle through. One knows the resilience of those people. One knows that some people will reach out, but just these actions in which we were not playing a role at a time when actually the thing had been served to us on a platter. We had good opportunity to position ourselves for what one may call the big power conflict, or the new great game, in which the influence in this area is being contested between two great powers, United States and China. And I suppose it was very clear for a long time that if we did not play our role correctly, then we will be on the losing side. I do not know about CPEC, how good the progress is, but one has a feeling that because of the indecisiveness on certain things on this part, the emphasis of the Chinese is shifting westwards. Whether it will go to Iran or Afghanistan will be in due course in market, that I do not. But I do know that in this big game, our role now is endangered. So it's not about Afghanistan that we are talking about. Afghanistan, as I said, will try and find its direction. Their people have had plenty of experience. They'll go through these winters also. But it's going to be the image of Pakistan within the country and outside the country. That is, I think, at risk. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, General Asad Durrani Sahab. In 31 points of the resolution, there was no pledge at all. Durrani Sahab.
Where?
In 31 point of resolution of OIC conference, there was no pledge of money just waiting for the banking channel to come in place, and then they will start playing their role. What kind of what is your comment on this? Like no pledge at all?
None. That's exactly the point one wants to convey, that OIC was not here to create some organization immediately so that at least the first trucks start rolling. It was here to help Pakistan get out of this difficult situation where perhaps we were saying that since we cannot act, is there anyone who will come and provide a good excuse to the rest of the world that we cannot do it? And banking channel may be one of them. You see, if after this conference, if the United Nations Security Council has pledged something or something else has happened, then I would say, well, okay, maybe because of this some benefit has taken place. But frankly, having known how certain things work, no one was waiting for this conference to decide. If this collective voice has made a difference, then I'll say, okay, all right. Thank God for these small little mercies. But otherwise, I do not think that is what happened. The damage that this conference has done to us in Pakistan, also in the thinking of the people here, in some of the conclusions that they have reached, that's going to be more damaging. It will be pledged in due course. There are going to be enough number of people. They are not necessarily going to be Muslims, because Pakistanis themselves may be well known as citizens to be very charitable, but the Muslim countries, even the oil-rich countries, have been very stingy on certain matters. May come from places like China, from Europe, from America even, but this conference, as it turned out, we were talking about how many promises or how many ings, suspecting, asserting, promising, condemning, resolving. I mean, that all has happened. That also shows, and this is also an old subject, an old lesson that one has learned. The louder you shout on certain things, it means that the intention to act there is that much less.
Okay. Thank you very much, Lieutenant General Asad Durrani sir, for your comments. And now I would move on to Ambassador Nagmana Hashmi Sahaba. Please unmute yourself. And how do you see, like, meanwhile, when different sectors are very critical about the result of the OIC conference, America has appreciated Pakistan for holding the conference, and they said like it was very vital to have such kind of a conference. But meanwhile, they said on the other hand, UN Security Council has given go ahead for the humanitarian aid to Afghanistan, and the pledges have emerged. They are about $1 billion at the moment, and the total need is $41 billion. They have estimated at the moment. Ambassador Sahaba, what do you think? Like, what could be the possible role of Pakistan, like despite OIC conference that has done nothing, as also Lieutenant General Asad Durrani has mentioned. And what could be the possible role of China, since you have been to China for years, and you know the nature of their political and strategic interventions. Please go ahead, Ambassador Nagaman Ahmed Sahaba.
To begin with, Assalamu alaikum, a very good afternoon.
Walaikum salam.
And ni hao to all my Chinese friends who are participating. And very happy and Merry Christmas to all our Christian colleagues, like everywhere else in the world. Christmas is also being celebrated with full vigor and activity in Pakistan, as we have a very, very large and a very active Christian population. So I, through your platform, would like to wish a very Merry Christmas to all our friends and some family members around the world. And we hope that this Christmas and the new year will have the message of peace and prosperity, hopefully in the year 2022, and we will be able to join hands with the rest of the world and maybe able to resolve some of the issues. Now, having said that, I had a totally different kind of framework in my mind to speak at this conference, but after having heard Lieutenant General Durrani, I am forced to sort of keep those thoughts aside and speak from a different angle. To begin with all the due respect and deference to Lieutenant General Durrani, he has a very vast experience. He has also had very direct experience of Afghanistan as well. And he was our ambassador in not only Saudi Arabia, but also in Germany. But I tend to very respectfully disagree with the kind of a very bleak and a very pessimistic and a kind of a doom and gloom scenario that he has presented. And I would also like to very respectfully disagree on his perception and that Pakistan has just been sitting on its backside and not really doing anything. Sometimes a lot of things are done and done better if done more discreetly and more quietly. As our Chinese friends always say, speak less and do more. Maybe finally we are beginning to understand the wisdom behind that phrase, and finally maybe we are also moving towards that stage when we want to talk less and do more. Now, just to answer some of because his intervention has actually disturbed me quite a bit, because I only retired last year, so I'm still very involved with the government, with a lot of think tanks and organizations that are very seriously working on these issues. And I can reassure General Saab that the government of Pakistan and its all its stakeholders and all the country as a whole is monitoring the Afghanistan situation very closely. There have been a lot of high-level meetings and consultations on how we move forward. And I think a lot of good work and effort in the background has already been done to reach out to the Afghan people, to very clearly convey our concerns and also our intentions to stand by Afghan people. I think OIC maybe has not been as successful as it was supposed to have been when it was made. But then for that case, neither has the UN, neither has the EU. So, but to really paint it all black, I think is a little unfair. Secondly, I do not agree that this conference has not had any effect, and this was just cover for Pakistan for its inaction. I think that is a very misplaced kind of analysis of where things stand today. You have to understand, gone are the days of being erratic. Gone are the days of thinking that we are the center of the world. Gone are the days of thinking that you can model anybody else according to your own desires and wishes. This is the time. The people of Afghanistan have suffered for 40 years. There's no other nation in the world that has suffered so much as Afghanistan. And following closely behind because of Afghanistan is Pakistan. And so we do understand very clearly the pain and the requirements of Afghanistan at the moment. And that is why we have been working behind the scenes very, very actively, talking to all the different stakeholders to, at the moment, look beyond the politics of Taliban, to look beyond the political grudges and the geopolitical and geo-economic competition and beyond proxy wars, and to look at the people of Afghanistan. This conference was about the people of Afghanistan. And I think in far as that is concerned, it has served its purpose, because the purpose was to bring it to the notice of the entire world. I read the Western media very closely. I read the South Asian media very closely every day. And you would see that there is no mention of Afghanistan anywhere in the Western media, whether it is electronic or print media, as if the issue of Afghanistan has completely disappeared. Nobody's talking about it because it doesn't suit the Americans and the West to talk about Afghanistan and to tell them what a miserable thing that they have left behind and how millions and millions of people are now at the verge of starvation because of the bad and wrong decisions and policies of the West. And I think it has actually put Afghanistan right in the center of the news again. It is not only the Muslim countries that have joined together, which they should have right away, but it has also shaken the UN. Finally, we got a resolution where they are talking about leaving the politics side and just looking at it at the moment as a humanitarian issue that needs to be addressed right now. And it has to be addressed, because it's not only Pakistan that will suffer if it's not addressed. If Afghanistan implodes today, do you think any of the South Asian nations or its other neighbors or Western Europe or America will not get affected? Everybody will get affected. And the West is very cognizant of this issue. And I am sure that they do not want the kind of outcome that they saw 20 years ago. And they do not even have the capacity, the financial or capacity or the appetite to accommodate the Afghan refugees and take care of large number of refugees. So the world understands this time around that humanitarian assistance needs to go in quite quickly. And again, we saw this statement from the US by Mr. Blinken, that humanitarian assistance should be delivered. And it's a very good thing that OIC has come across and that fund had been sort of established. So through that, maybe, we can send humanitarian assistance. Yes, there are ways to send assistance other than through banking channels. But and it was very important for Pakistan to point it to the world, because Jansab himself said, we have the FATF to take care of. The rest of the world also has FATF to care. You have Taliban are a sanctioned entity at the moment. So therefore, any banking interaction with them is not possible. So if we don't talk about it, how are we going to sort of put money, dollars and pounds and euros and Pak rupees in sacks and deliver them to the Afghans? That's not a possibility. And I also disagree with them that we have not encouraged the NGOs to flood Afghanistan. Thank God we have not done it. What is, we have to be very careful. It is a very fragile government there. And we should try and ensure that the NGOs, Pakistani NGOs, international NGOs who are going there are credible, genuine NGOs. Otherwise, we saw what happened in the jihad time. There were hundreds of thousands of NGOs who went into Afghanistan, and see the chaos they created. So I am so glad that that has not happened. And only now I saw some advertisements on television with some of the really established NGOs making appeals for donations in kind so that they could be sent to Afghanistan. Pakistan made a very, very historical and very positive decision when it allowed India to transit the humanitarian assistance through Pakistan. My colleague, the Indian ambassador, former Indian ambassador, is joining the conference. He would know we have our own issues with the transit trade of India to Afghanistan through Pakistan. But still, understanding completely the humanitarian need there, we did that. And behind the back, we have been talking to the Chinese, to the West, to everybody, and trying to explain it to them that they need to come forward and help. We have limited capacity. If anybody thinks that Pakistan alone can do it, or we should have sent trucks upon trucks upon trucks of aid, we cannot.
Ma'am, will you please now conclude your
I will conclude.
And I think you have talked very elaborately on different aspects. I would like you to throw light on the role of neighbors that doesn't, they don't need any banking channel to support. And please go ahead.
They also need banking channels. I mean, they can send humanitarian assistance through trucks and through goods. But if Afghanistan does not only need humanitarian assistance and goods, they need to pay their government servants, they need to pay their doctors, they need to pay their professionals. So banking channels have to be, they have to be enabled to do trade, to do something. Otherwise, it is not going to stabilize. As far as the neighbors are concerned, now a lot of the neighbors are Muslim neighbors, and we have now the OIC fund. They should go through that fund, because that fund has been allowed to go and deliver money. So what is the issue? Some of the humanitarian organizations can also carry money. UN itself can also carry money a little bit, not in the kind of volumes that is required. For that, you need banking channel. So I think the onus of helping, particularly Muslims countries around, is on them, and there's nothing stopping them. A lot of the Central Asian states have their borders with Afghanistan. Iran has a border. We have a border. They should go ahead. As far as China is concerned, you would remember that China has the only country who's also a neighbor and who's also very powerful, both politically and financially, but it has very carefully kept itself away from embroiling in the controversies and politics of Afghanistan. China is therefore in a very good position, because it has throughout helped the people of Afghanistan quietly throughout jihad, they have development projects there. So China has a good relationship with the people of Afghanistan, and China has already been one of the largest donors so far of humanitarian assistance, which is delivered there. China is very cognizant. We have had long discussions with China. It would be wrong for anybody to think that China would fill the political or the security gap that's left behind because of the withdrawal of the Western troops. China never interferes in the internal affairs of other people, and its soldiers don't set foot on foreign land. So its way of helping is very different. It will give humanitarian assistance, but it will enable the people of Afghanistan to stand on their own feet. And that is where China must come forward and help them by, doing joint ventures or by gifting projects to them in infrastructure, in industry, in schools, in healthcare, in hospitals. And that I am sure it is planning to do, and it will do. But China works in a very discreet and a very organized manner, and with the long-term thinking. And at the moment, the only country that has the wherewithal, including the fluidity of foreign exchange, is China. And it is also very important for China to see Afghanistan as a united, established, peaceful country, so that it does not give the opportunity to some of the disgruntled organizations, including the ETIM and other organizations, to make it a base to create problems in different Western regions of China. So China is very cognizant of the issue. It has the ability, and it should, and it will definitely help Afghanistan. They have openly said also they had already started meeting the Taliban even before they became the administration in Kabul. So there is an understanding that China has with the Taliban, but its focus, as the focus of Pakistan should be, is not the government. It is the people of Afghanistan, and China is expected to play a positive role, and it I know for sure is working on different strategies to bring peace, long-term peace and prosperity and development assistance to Afghanistan.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much, Ambassador Nagmana Hashmi. Saba taking
Durrani Saab's statement has really upset me quite a lot.
No, it's the beauty of the discussion that we can differ with all.
I know, but I don't know. I don't want to say anything. Okay.
Okay. Okay. Well, we shall move forward, and our next speaker. Soon I'll take you afterwards, after we have completed our list of panels then. And meanwhile, I welcome former ambassador to Pakistan from Iran, Mashallah Shakri Sahab. Welcome, sir, for joining the discussion. Now, our next speaker is Ambassador retired Rakesh Sood. He has been India's ambassador to Afghanistan. Sir, unmute yourself and let us know your take on the present situation in Afghanistan and the post-Afghanistan, post-OIC conference impact in Afghanistan. Please go ahead, sir.
Thank you, Munir Saab, for inviting me to talk about how we are looking at Afghanistan from India. Let me, when I come to the OIC, I think I have very little to add. We have seen two very different views expressed already by General Durrani and by Ambassador Hashmi. So I am, since India is not a member of the OIC, India was not represented at the OIC conference in any way. I mean, my knowledge about it would be only from what appeared in the media. And I must say that, frankly, I did read the statement, and there was the CEO or the head of the OIC Development Bank, the Islamic Development Bank, who was present and who urged that a trust fund be established. And I kind of scratched my head to see how this would work, or whether there were any commitments or pledges made to the trust. And at least I couldn't find any. So I just thought that maybe okay, some. But so I will refrain from that. But I would just like to say that, look, I think I agree with both the previous important role for China, because China is on a westward expansion of a land expansion, as it were, gaining influence in countries to the west, which means Central Asia, which means Iran, which means Afghanistan, and certainly CPEC is also very much part and parcel of it, given the very old and traditional strong ties between China and Pakistan. And however, so far, to the best of my knowledge, Chinese assistance in Afghanistan has been literally minimal. It has been very limited. They built a hospital in Kabul. They have provided some amount of money. Then they wanted to get involved with some defense cooperation in Badakhshan because it borders their sensitive areas. You know, the two most sensitive border provinces that China has are Xinjiang and Tibet. And so that was it. Then Chinese also made an announcement of, I think, $31 million of humanitarian assistance. But otherwise, the Chinese engagement, I mean, like, for example, more than 10 years ago, they took the lease on the Mezainak copper mines, but there is absolutely nothing that has happened there over the last 10, 12 years. So the Chinese, I think, are primarily concerned on the security platform, first and foremost, because these are two restive provinces that they have. And I think that is their primary concern. And I think they would also naturally like to depend on Pakistan to be able to ensure that if there are going to be any Chinese investments in the area, to ensure their security, just as Pakistan is also obliged to ensure security for the CPEC projects in Pakistan, which is quite understandable. Now that, having said that, I think it is also clear that countries like China, Russia, Iran, Pakistan were all in the forefront of demanding a US withdrawal. And now the US has withdrawn, and with the US, the West. My assessment is that they are in no hurry to come back, at least not during the Biden administration. They feel that they can ensure their security. And their basic concern is they don't want to be deluged with refugees. The rest, as far as they're concerned, I mean, is the region's problem. So there is an old saying, be careful what you wish for, because it may come back to haunt you. And I think the situation is a little bit like that. I remember looking at Chinese statements. There was one Chinese statement saying, the US should withdraw. And very quickly, once the withdrawal became imminent, then it became that they should withdraw. They have been guilty of hasty withdrawal, and they have messed up the situation. But the fact is that, as I see it, I think we have known from at least 10 or 11 years that US was going to withdraw when the process of legitimization of the Taliban began. After all, the Doha office was one very visible step when the Taliban opened an international office in Doha. Then there were a number of peace processes, peace tracks, Istanbul process, Heart of Asia process, Moscow dialogue process. There were talks in Pakistan, in Urumqi, and so on. Taliban delegations were visiting Tashkent, they were visiting Tehran, they were going to European capitals, and so on and so on. And then, of course, in 2019, you started direct talks between US and Taliban. And then in February 2020, we saw the Doha Agreement. So I think it has been very much on the line, very, very visible to any observer that the Americans were going to leave. And that and once they left, that their interest would automatically wane. So as Ambassador Hashmi reminded us that today there is very little mention in Western media about Afghanistan, it's absolutely true. The same is the case of references to in Western media about Libya, for example. So I think that is the way the world works. And I guess we have to take it, accept reality the way it is. And which brings me to my last point about India. Now, we closed our embassy. We did not engage with the Taliban. You know, everybody was talking about supporting an Afghan-led, Afghan-owned peace process. But the reality is that whether it was the Americans or whether it was the Chinese or whether it was the Russians, they were saying it, but at the same time, they had their own channels open to the Taliban. And very often, the government in Kabul had at least incomplete knowledge of what was transpiring on these through these communication channels. We saw the kind of arguments taking place. Some of those got reported in public media between Zalmay Khalilzad and Ashraf Ghani and all the rest of it. So we know all that. And India somehow or the other decided that we played with a straight bat and said, okay, we believe in an Afghan-led, Afghan-owned peace process. So whatever the Afghans decide, we'll only follow them. And as a result, we had no contact with the Taliban. And that is why we closed our embassy on within 48 hours of the Taliban entering Kabul and left. Thereafter, there have been some limited kind of contacts. We have seen some statements coming from the Taliban regime in Kabul suggesting that they would welcome India to come back. But given the fact that the Haqqani network plays a very, very critical role in the current regime, and India has an uncomfortable relationship with the Haqqani network. I mean, the Haqqani network was identified as the entity that was responsible for a number of suicide attacks on Indian interests, including the Indian embassy, where a number of people were killed, hostels and hotels where Indians were staying, and so on. Therefore, I do not see the Indian government in a hurry to go back to Kabul. And I think that as far as we are concerned, while we see the need for humanitarian assistance, and that is why we offered humanitarian assistance, 50,000 tons of wheat and medical assistance. We also airlifted when we brought back on an evacuation flight. We brought back some Indians who had been stranded there and so on. And when the plane went back, we sent about 1.6 tons of urgent medical supplies in that aircraft. And we are sending 50,000 tons of food. So perhaps if this road corridor from through Pakistan remains open and we don't have too many difficulties with regard to modalities, perhaps we can provide more humanitarian assistance. But other than that, my guess is that India will think very carefully before actually going back to reopen its embassy. Finally, I think I would just like to end. I think from what I hear in terms of the two different views so far, I think that this is somewhat of a similar dilemma that Pakistan faced earlier vis-a-vis Afghanistan. That Pakistan has always found it easier to deal with more Islamist Pashtuns than nationalist Pashtuns. And I think that is true with both Pakistani Pashtuns as well as Afghan Pashtuns. Having served in Pakistan also, though not as High Commissioner, but many years earlier as political counselor, and then having been in Kabul, I saw that dilemma and that kind of tension that it creates. And I think that we are probably seeing that, because I say that because the role that the Taliban or the Haqqani network played in trying to bring about an understanding between the TTP and the Pakistan authorities, the short-lived ceasefire that collapsed, the kind of demands that were made, I think bring that to the fore. And therefore, I do think that we are going to see some more troubling times ahead in the region. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you very much, Ambassador Retired Rakesh Sood Sahab. Thank you for your deliberation and your take on Afghanistan. And now I would like to go, I would request Professor Dr. Ahmed Usal, if you are there. I think he's not there. Abdullah Khanjani Sahab. Abdullah Khanjani Sahab, are you there? Please unmute yourself.
Yes, I'm here. Thank you.
Okay.
I'm sorry.
Please go ahead. What is the situation and how do you see the role of neighbors and the post-OIC scenario? Abdullah Khanjani
Sure.
Sahab, please go ahead.
Thank you so much, Ahmad Saib. It's such a pleasure to hear to this distinguished panelist. It has been so enlightening, and it's my personal privilege to be part of this conversation today. Let me also build up on what Durrani Saab said about OIC. I think it's important to know what's the feeling of Afghans towards the OIC and the so-called Islamic world. To be very honest, most of the people in Afghanistan are well aware of the limited capacity and interest of the Islamic world towards supporting Afghans during this turbulent time. We have seen that most of these countries are following the Western powers' lead when it comes to supporting either politically or financially in Afghanistan. And it hasn't been a big shock for the people inside the country, but it has been more educating process for the people to understand more the dynamics of the political realism in the world. Secondly, I think it's important to touch upon 4 key challenges, if I may say, or tasks that the Taliban are facing at the moment to deal with it. I think these dilemmas are important to be highlighted. The first dilemma that I identified is the anger management and the governance in Afghanistan. As the distinguished panelists talked about, I think international organizations are replacing the current regime in Afghanistan to some extent. While the key question remain, what would happen with the state building and the capacity building within the institutions in Afghanistan in the long term? I think this is the questions need to be addressed at some point, because humanitarian assistance is important, critical for the people of Afghanistan. It's vital, but it would not end up into development in Afghanistan. I think the dilemma will remain how to move from being a recipient of humanitarian assistance to more developing aid in the long term. Into this context, I think the second flaws or the gap that we are seeing at the moment also, that the Taliban are also not being successful as the de facto rulers to represent an indigenous policy for poverty reduction in Afghanistan. They were coming with a mentality that sadly we had in our ex-government inside Afghanistan, to be 100% reliant on the international aid. I think international aid could not solve the problem of Afghanistan. Taliban may have to come at some point with some indigenous initiatives, which would be based on a very historic social welfare system and institution based in Afghanistan that could be helpful for the people of Afghanistan in the long term. I think these 2 dilemmas with the anger management in Afghanistan, what I say is, important. With the governance in Afghanistan, 150 days almost after the Taliban took over the country, I think they're playing the same game as the insurgent group to play within the ambiguity rather than representing any solid policy for the governance in Afghanistan. Well, it may help, but in the long term, claiming for being a state needs to have some sort of policy, while I'm sure everybody is well aware that the Taliban hasn't represented a page of their policy, what's their end state and how they would like to move forward. I think this is also an important conversation need to be pointed for the future, not so far, but for the near future. The second dilemma that Afghanistan and the Taliban is, I think, facing at the moment is the management of the cultural and political diversity of Afghanistan. Well, I sadly see a track that everybody is so much overwhelmed by a short-term victory. And this has been the case by the people in the north of Afghanistan also in 2001, that they perceived themselves just within a year the ultimate winner of the political game in Afghanistan. And they build up every kind of stabilizing model on 2001, 2, and 3 based on that sense of victory, while they have missed a historic fact that in Afghanistan, winning an insurgency is so easy. Sustaining the governance and the government in Afghanistan is a tough question, considering the fact that there is no indigenous revenue for state building and running a state in Afghanistan. And I think Taliban is following the same path, and they are rejecting and ignoring the political realities in Afghanistan. Firstly, I think the new regime, as Ambassador Hashimi mentioned, is fragile by different means. It's divided when it comes to presenting a cohesive policies for ruling the country. I think there is a strong competition between the individuals over manipulating the institutions and the resources at the moment. I don't know where it would go. And of course, rejecting political realities in the ground, creating a purely Pashtun-dominated government without gender equality within the system, taking the country to the stone age by rejecting the education of the girls, for example, the political and social participation of the woman. I fully understand and see and can read between the lines the cultural differences in Afghanistan between rural area and the urban area, between the south and the north. But in the meantime, I am very worried that Afghanistan has changed in the past 20 years, not only in Kabul, but in the major cities, and how these differences will be managed in the future. We as the previous government sadly been unable to manage this properly, and that political failure ended up to a military failure. I really wish that this vicious cycles will not repeat itself into a deadly civil war in Afghanistan, if I may say, in the course of the time, because I always remind myself, if a Northern alliance could not sustain in Afghanistan, a Southern alliance cannot also sustain it. As I think we have to be very careful about it and learn it. The third dilemma is the city, I think. This counterterrorism. Counterterrorism is important, in my opinion, because it will really shape the regional countries' interests and concerns over Afghanistan. 3 questions to be asked at the moment. The first question is, the Taliban has tested their lack against the Daesh, and they have also mediated between the TTP and the Pakistan government and negotiation. I think these two parallel processes were important in Afghanistan. However, it's too early to gauge the capacity of the Taliban so far. The second question would be that in the previous government, the Afghan security forces were recipient of the almost everyone in international community in the fight against the regional and international terrorist groups. While we have been in the forefront of that war, the Taliban has been one of those elements. There has been more than 25 other regional and international terrorist group noted in Kabul that they were fighting. I think that fight has been given now to the Taliban. They have three options to move with it, in my opinion. The first one is accommodation and containment. Accommodation and containment, what we have been seeing recently by registering the name of these foreign fighters and these kind of efforts that the Taliban are making would be a very costly politically process for the Taliban in the long term, because I mean, I would do all respect, although I'm not a regional expert, but I fully understand that the Chinese or the core interest of the Chinese are fighting with ATIM, not accommodating or containing ATIM. They have been asking the previous government very bluntly about their demands and security concerns. And this is with Uzbekistan. This is the same with Tajikistan. I think ISIS is an issue for Iranians, and in the long term, TTP will be a problem for Pakistan. I think everybody in the region will ask the Taliban for the very clear deliverable when it comes to city. This is important to see in the long term. Fighting with the like-minded other Islamic extremist group in Afghanistan is also not an easy job to do for the Taliban, considering their long-term relationship in the past 20 years, and not only past 20 years, but 40 years. I really don't know how they're going to do that. We have seen a deadly fighting between the Taliban and ISIS in many provinces, but we also noted, according to the report of the UN, that ISIS has expanded all over the country, and now they are present in 34 provinces of Afghanistan, and they have been kind of cannot say successful, but they have been kind of active recently in challenging the traditional notion of security of the Taliban, even in Kabul. The recent attack of Kabul was 2 days ago on Thursday, in front of the passports department, where the Taliban fighters and officials were coming on the specific day to receive passports. And I think the Taliban are now tasting the dose of their own medicines, and somehow. Lastly, I think this geopolitical position of this new regime is important also. We haven't seen any initiative yet. There has been so much communication. I think the Taliban have been successful in giving assurance to publicly when it comes to communicating with the countries in the region that they will fight against any kind of threats that's security concerns for our neighbors. But in the long term, I think these words needs to be turned into an action. As I have mentioned during the city part, that I'm not sure how the Taliban will be successful. What's their capacity? Who's going to help them to do this fight? And how they're going to be doing this fight with their like-minded brothers and sisters who have been helping them in their so-called jihad against envisions in the past 20 years, and even more than that, 40 years of the presence of the international fighters in Afghanistan. But there are three options, which all of them will be costly, in my opinion, for the Taliban. If the Taliban will follow the lead of the Pakistan in their geopolitical positioning, then it would be not very interesting for the other regional players and for the international players somehow too. If the Taliban will claim some sort of non-alignment policy in the long term, I don't know how they're going to be managing their relationship in the region and beyond the region with the world, because this has been the dilemma with us. In our previous government, we had a lot of conversation. What's the best way to deal with the challenges in the region? I always remember, always use the word that I don't know whether it makes sense politically or not, that we have been facing with the international curse in Afghanistan. So if you not invite a superpower to be in the country, you don't have money to sustain. You don't have food to eat. By the time you ask an international power to jump in, then the region will not allow you. The geopolitics of Afghanistan will not allow you to deal with it. This dilemma is, I think, in front of the Taliban.
Okay.
And I don't know how they're going to deal with it. Thank you so much, Munir.
Okay, thank you very much, Abdullah Khanjani Saab, for your perspective of Afghanistan. And now I would like to go to, because we have a lot of China's role in it, and let's see like what Zoon Ahmad Khan think as a research fellow of Center of China and Globalization of this situation. Zoon, are you there? Yes, please go ahead. Let me unmute you and unmute yourself. Unmute yourself, please. Yeah.
Yes.
Please go ahead.
Unmuted.
Thank you, Zoon.
Thank you, Munir Saab. Thank you, Munir Saab. And firstly, I would also like to say, yes, Merry Christmas and Quaid-e-Azam's birthday. It's for Pakistan.
Yeah.
The 25th of December is an important day. And I've been listening to what, first of all, General Assad talked about, the OIC in particular, and like Ambassador Nagmana, I would like to say that we can't be that morbid about the outcomes. The OIC could have delivered more. There could have been more commitments made, especially given that many countries are capable of proactively helping financially Afghanistan, but we didn't see that. However, what we did see was that a sense of like bringing this issue, bringing the suffering of ordinary Afghans to the forefront and the need for consensus. The fact that the United Nations was present and the speech made there really talked about how dire the situation for Afghans is. And this is something that I think, is something important. We need to keep that conversation going. It was also brought up how Western media has stopped talking about this issue. It's not a trending topic anymore. And actually, just last week, for instance, I was at an ICRC briefing for some Chinese experts talking about their work in Afghanistan. And one of the things that came up over there was also that why Afghanistan is just not being talked about, the degree of the crisis, the extent to which people are suffering, how these health workers and teachers are working without being paid salaries, and how organizations like the ICRC, for instance, are playing a very integral role, and they are finding innovative ways to work with the current administration to help people. They are making sure that the money being paid is directly going into the hands of ordinary Afghans, but this needs to be scaled. This is one possible solution. So in China in general, the conversation is active. If you follow Chinese media, if you follow also the official Twitter accounts of the Chinese spokespersons, they are constantly talking about the need for a consensus and focusing on ordinary Afghan people. What Ambassador Nagmana also mentioned was important, that for China, it's always been about helping Afghan people. Currently, if we see the trade between China and Afghanistan, pine nuts trade, it's also being talked about. It's generating money for ordinary people. I recently spoke with an Afghan entrepreneur based in Beijing for many years. And he was telling me that every Afghan carpet being sold in China is feeding 400 families. I have to verify this, but these are small steps and lasting ways in which China sees that Afghanistan can be helped. So in the long term, I think one thing that I focus on, for instance, is the Belt and Road Initiative and the Shanghai Cooperation Organization. When we look at China's overall approach and perspective, and recently we also had the Global South Human Rights Forum, we had the Democracy Forum in China as well. And the idea is essentially long-term and lasting solutions. China is pragmatic. China's approach, based on their also domestic development experience, is that we need to enable, we need to enable ordinary people to envision a more positive future, and investing in the economy is a very important way. So for years now, China has been engaged with developing countries in this way. And I feel like if especially you look at the SCO, where China is a major, obviously the SCO has 8 members and now with Iran 9, all of these members are neighbors of Afghanistan. And the core idea behind the SCO is also integration, is also connectivity. And that idea, that vision is incomplete without Afghanistan being a part of it. If we talk about the China-Pakistan economic corridor as well, the long-term vision for CPEC is to extend to Central Asia through Afghanistan. So in that sense, I think it's important to have an overall perspective on what China's approach and mindset and perspective towards development in general is. And this is a holistic way to resolve many issues. The SCO talks about the 3 evil forces: terrorism, extremism, and separatism. And the holistic approach, the lasting approach towards that, is investing in people, cultural connectivity, economic improvement. So that's one aspect of it. I really thought I'm going to speak a bit later, but I feel like everyone had something to say about China and what China should be doing. China, from what I feel, is a focus that no country's unilateral efforts can really solve the issue. We need to keep the global community involved, and especially the region can play a very important role. Just next week, I'm also hosting a webinar at CCG focusing on the humanitarian situation and possible lasting solutions. So China is pragmatic. They're doing more than they will talk about. But if you also follow the way the OIC summit was covered, it did raise the importance and the need for proactive efforts on the issue of Afghanistan. Then we know that, again, infrastructure development, all of this is something that China is keen to pursue in the country. But these are long-term solutions because we share the region. What happens in Afghanistan affects all of us. And that's where a regional consensus is required. Every platform, every main meeting, the SCO Secretary General, Mr. Norov, was also invited. And he also would mention that the SCO and generally the global community needs to keep helping and thinking about innovative ways to help the people of Afghanistan currently. Another point that I would like to mention is that China has also criticized how Afghanistan's funds have been frozen. This is something that they feel is obviously wrong. It's unethical. Ordinary Afghans need to be paid. The current situation is very dire. So they are raising their voice. They are engaged with the United Nations as well to help promote and enable a global consensus and help other countries and regions to really step up and act. And again, lasting solutions are what are required for Afghanistan and for the region at large. So this is something which I feel nobody would disagree with. And if we really think about the Belt and Road vision, it is about, so this is just a basic idea. I think in any case, welcoming more, highlighting the issue is something that the OIC summit successfully did. It could have made better commitments. But that said, we cannot ridicule this initiative, because at the end of the day, Afghanistan, as I mentioned, is not a trend, has not been a trending topic for many countries, many regions. So this is something important to recognize. And trade with Afghanistan is a lasting way. Afghanistan needs the whole region, countries in the region, to step up at this point, because especially Pakistan and Afghanistan have a symbiotic relationship, and all countries in the region will face consequences if you're not able to act decisively. And this is something that is being talked about. Chinese social media is also important to follow. It's constantly mentioning the humanitarian crisis and how steps can be taken to help ordinary people of Afghanistan. So the conversation is not political, it's not divisive, it's about enabling solutions in the short term and the long term. Okay. So I also, and just one last thing, that next week's webinar, we will be inviting Afghan experts, Chinese, also from other countries in the region, to discuss what are lasting solutions, how can we build a consensus, and how can, especially I feel that SCO can play an integral role, but how can we build better consensus among regional actors to have an approach which is compatible and can ensure that this winter especially, we don't see a complete, there's already a free fall of the economy. If this worsens, then the issues we will be confronted with will be much more dire. So this is a basic perspective, yeah. Okay. Thank you very much, Zoon Ahmed Khan, for letting us know the international response to humanitarian crisis in Afghanistan and China's perspective as well. Can you hold on this point I'll add one small thing. Okay, please go ahead. Yeah, just the 5 principles of peaceful coexistence, because I think Ma'am Nakwana was the ambassador in China, and she mentioned this, that China's approach is very different. I mean, some countries, some people, they're talking about this vacuum. First the Soviets were in Afghanistan, then the Americans were. There was, as if, you know, China has the same approach, perspective. China is extremely against interventionism, moralism. It's something that has not delivered results. And, you know, another issue was that how many media in the West especially were talking about Afghanistan just became poor, you know, as if overnight this country became completely crippled and dysfunctional. The fact is that over 20 years, there are many examples of positive initiatives as well in urban communities. We saw a lot of progress. But the fact is that there is a big urban and rural divide. Afghanistan was dependent on foreign aid. And over 20 years, this was not resolved. It could have been, it should have been. There's something wrong about the approach over these years. So China is really a shift from this kind of perspective, empowering ordinary people through economic initiatives, regional connectivity. And China is part of the region. So we all share the same interests, short-term and long-term. Okay. Yeah. Thank you, Zoon, for further explanation. Now I would like to move to Dr. Sumaya Murawati. She is head of South Asian and Afghanistan Affairs at Tehran International Studies and Research Institute, Tehran. Dr. Sumaya, please go ahead.
Salam, and thank you so much for having me. And let me to send my warm hello to General Asad Durrani and Ambassador Naqme Hashemi and Ambassador Rakesh Sood and my professor, Dr. Shakeri, our late ambassador in Pakistan, about this topic. Let me to mention some point. Sorry. The situation we have in Afghanistan, it's a problem for all over the world, but it's in a different, make a different situation for the neighbors in Afghanistan. So the approach the country, the Afghan neighbors have to accept for Afghanistan, it's really different for all over the world. They have a time maybe to think, focus, and plan for Afghanistan in long and short term. But about Iran, Central Asia, Pakistan, and China, the crisis, it's really close, and they day by day suffered the problem with Afghanistan. So the country in a region, exactly Iran and Pakistan and China, they every day face with consequences with this crisis. The spread of insecurity, the wave of immigration, the spread of extremist group, drug, and many other things pose serious security risk for this country. So these countries cannot wait for the end of the Afghanistan internal development or the decision from the international community find a solution for Afghanistan. So there's some meeting, some conference about the Islamic or a neighbor's country can be a very good and have a very helpful point for the Afghanistan situation. The above issue, we need to consider about the neighbors countries' national interest and national security interest to face the crisis. As you know, all the neighbors country at the day of the crisis and when the Taliban go to Afghanistan, try to secure their borders and do something for stop the overlapped insecurity to their countries. But as my friend and colleague mentioned for China, let me to speak about China. China as a superpower whose geopolitical power also is expanding, economic project and has an economic project in Central Asia. One of the important points about the China, it's China as a country who be the very, very serious competition with United States. I think the China's politician every day ask this question from themselves. Why the United States withdraw the Afghanistan and made the possibility of connecting CPAC project and the other mega project in Central Asia. And this withdrawal helped China to maybe in a future win the mega projects in the region. And as we know, the competition with this superpower don't let this scenario can be happen. So I think at the first time we have to answer this question. So I think we don't have some parts of data about the Afghanistan and the competition between China, US, Russia, and the other point. Always we focus on the Taliban and the region. I think we have to see the problem another way and from the competition with the big and superpower. And the other point, I think, because I think we don't have any time, let me to mention another point about Afghanistan. And I think it has a very, very serious problem in future for all the country, maybe in region or all over the world. It is the way that Taliban gained the power in Afghanistan. It's not important it is successful or not successful, but as a extremist group, as a group that in the past, most of the country mentioned the Taliban in their blacklist as a terrorist group. or as a militant opposition for one country. If the other country accepts to work with Taliban, just maybe because of the secure and help Afghan people, can send some, aid to Afghanistan, but it can make a model for other countries. So I think apart from the recognition of this group, the other crisis, the other problem we have suffered in future with it's the Taliban model for other, extremist group all over the board, exactly in a region. Central Asia, as you know, has a different militant group. China as well have this problem. Iran, Pakistan, or other country in region also have this problem. So if we accept Taliban gain the power and get rid of, the legal central power, so it can be happen in the future for all the country in a region or other region in the Middle East. And another point I think we need to think, it's about the geopolitical point about Afghanistan. If Taliban, because of the other country, accept its power in Afghanistan, send some, benefit for them. For example, accept to the tie between central power and Pakistan, or central power with Iran, or some point for China or Russia, it can be make some problem for other country. The first and very, very important problem is the possibility of the tie between, extremist group in the region. As you know, under the Taliban, we have more than 23 terrorist group or extremist group from Central Asia, from some parts of South Asia, from Kafkaz, or from Syria and Iraq. If the Taliban model can help this group, we have to wait for other, other step of problem, other step of crisis in other parts of region. For example, in Central Asia, Uzbekistan, Tajikistan, or Kafkaz. So I think Taliban, it's not just about Afghanistan. When we speak about Taliban, we have to think about future of regions. So I think one of the important reason the Islamic group try to find some, solution, find some way to manage and control problem in Afghanistan. It's about maybe the possibility of overlap of crisis in future. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Sumaya Marwati, for your take on. And now the floor is open for question and answers. If anyone has a question, I may raise hand so that I can unmute him or her. Please. Until you raise your hands, I have a question to have, yes, Khalid Humayun Sahab. Please go ahead. Unmute yourself, Khalid Humayun Sahab.
Thank you, Munir Sahab.
I
have two questions to ask. One is from my brother from Afghanistan. That what do you think? How many people, or in percentage, how many people are backing or inviting the Taliban, or they like the Taliban government? Okay. And my another question is from Asad Saab. That Durrani Saab, what do you think that this government will last for how many months or years? Thank you so much.
Okay, Abdullah Saab.
Durrani Saab may go first and then I will follow.
Okay. Durrani Saab, please go ahead.
To say how long this government will last, actually it is in the realm of some sort of an assessment at best, speculation. Depending on how this government performs, one will find out. There was a long time ago, one did believe that something like the Taliban movement or the Mujahideen at that time, or the militant groups who do very well in the field while fighting, once the fighting ends, they lose traction. They usually disintegrate. There is I once made a very reckless prediction about the Mujahideen government, that once the Taliban government, that once they would reunify Afghanistan, I'm talking about 97, 98, 99, then that government will dissolve itself because it is not in sync with the Afghan traditions. But this particular setup, the last couple of years, one has seen this, the new Taliban transform themselves from a purely fighting outfit to some people who have learned diplomacy, media campaign, even district management. And that partially explains how they could actually not only position themselves, but take over Afghanistan so quickly. So if this is now the new character of this government, my own guess is that they are going to be in here for a long haul. In due course, they will carry out those steps that are necessary, like the human rights, the women's rights, and so on. Most importantly, they will also integrate other groups, because this is how Afghanistan was created, by a grand consensus, grand bargain, as some people say, and that is how it stabilizes when everyone has its stake. So that should be my best bet. Right now, we have the Taliban government, and I think we will do better. We'll be very wise if we take into account that for the next foreseeable, or for the foreseeable future, this is the government that we will have to deal with.
Mr. Abdullah.
Thank you. Aman Saab, we don't have data in Afghanistan to talk about it. There has been some sort of surveys in the past. I mean, Asia Foundation did survey in the past, Gallup and these. They were a very political one. I don't buy it, despite they have given a very low level of currency to the Taliban on their surveys. I think two elements is important to understand the Taliban legitimacy and the level of support in Afghanistan. The first one is the economic situation in Afghanistan. I think Afghanistan in the past 20 years has been divided between two minorities and one majority. The majority was a suing population, a population that has been left behind with no agency and development and economic efforts in Afghanistan. But two minorities, a minority in the urban area which benefited from the international presence in Afghanistan, and a minority who have stood against the international presence in Afghanistan. Now a minority has left those who have been engaged with the previous government in Afghanistan. Another minority has taken the government in Afghanistan, which is the Taliban. The question, as Durrani Saab said, will be how the performance of the Taliban will be in order to buy in and the support of this suing population. The second element is the ethnic element in Afghanistan. Taliban is predominantly representing Pashtun traditionalists, while their new emirate cannot serve not only the non-Pashtuns' interest and political participation, but also it does not serve the interest of the technocrats, the Pashtun who have been in the urban area and related mostly into the previous government in the past 20 years. In the meantime, Taliban has not been successful, as Durrani Saab said, and I don't use the integration word, I say, in accommodating the differences of political forces in Afghanistan, and they are thinking that they don't need to compromise and reconcile either only with themselves. So I cannot give a concrete answer to this, but there is some sort of support for the Taliban, predominantly among the Pashtun traditionalists, and of course in the bigger religious part of the country, all over the country. But when it comes to the urban area, when it comes to non-Pashtuns, specifically with the Tajiks, Hazaras, and Uzbeks, we don't see a lot of support and a lot of celebration, at least in the social media and their discourses in the traditional media. Thank you, sir.
Okay, thank you, Abdullah Sahab. Now, Angasha Metra, please go ahead, your question.
Salam alaikum and best greetings on Christmas. Asad Durrani Sahab, I would like to make you my addressee. I can't translate my euphoria into words when I first met you 5 months back into the similar, webinar via Munir Ahmad sir's platform. Sir, I have 2 questions. One, there can't be 2 kings in the same region. So for the international community, there are 2 players in Afghanistan. One is Taliban, the incumbent, also the other one who is in exile, the NRF. So that is one of the irritant for international players to recognize the government, to recognize the player. So what's your opinion about it? Secondly, the kind of resistance. We have seen the resistance across the, Iran, in Pakistan. I'm talking about the recent one, and also in Delhi following that NRC, CA, and a couple of other things, the signing that protects and all. So there's a wave. Do you think any possibility of a massive upsurge from the people, from the society, will it radiate? I hope I'm clear. My questions are clear.
No, I'm afraid you were not. I could barely make out what the first question was about 2 tiers or 2 types of opinions about the Afghans, the Taliban and the people in the exile and the recognition problem. This is going to take a backseat in case of the Taliban. They are more concerned right now, frankly. They know that they have to do a couple of things. But remember, the Taliban is not a monolith. There are also factions within. And those factions keep threatening the leadership that if you do not maintain that hard line, and if you go and, reward some others who were not the part of the jihad, then you're going to go and join Daesh or something. So unity amongst their ranks is going to be very important. Recognition, less than that. The second question, if someone can try and explain to me what is the gist of the second question, I'll try to answer it.
I will ask him, but please explain your second question in brief and the direct words, please.
Yeah, of course. Is there any possibility from the civilian, of a civilian and non-NRF public upsurge movement in Afghanistan against the Taliban? Against the Taliban?
Against the Taliban?
Yeah.
Against the Taliban? Oh, yes, of course, indeed. There is no doubt about that, 30, 40 years that we have seen and the type of division that do exist. In fact, every possible division exists in Afghanistan. It is tribal, it is sectarian, it is cultural, it's geographic. So in that, and especially, when the foreign occupation takes place, and most of the time Afghanistan has been under foreign occupation, there is another division that comes into play, and that is the resistance, which is usually by the tribesmen, and the collaboration. Those are the progressive, the citizens, and so on and so forth, city folks. So that division also exists. So to say that now everyone will gather against under this flag and will reconcile to the whole thing, maybe temporarily, but in due course, yes, there would be some sort of a problem of the power politics, as we say, that will happen.
Okay, we are privileged to have the presence of Iran's former ambassador to Pakistan, Dr. Mashallah Shakri, Sahab with us. Mashallah Shakri Sahab, would you like to shed some light on the issue that we are discussing today? Mashallah Shakir Sahab. Okay. I have a supplementary question to all the speakers, the panelists, that as mentioned, Dr. Sumaya Amravati, like if we accept recognize the government of Afghanistan, then there are so many other places where there are like the hardliners, they are pushing their agenda forward. So what would be the message to them if I could translate in my words? Vanessa, would you like to take on it? And then I would ask other speakers too. Asad Durrani sir.
No, I think this is going to be a struggle. I mean, Babar has already considered that there will be a struggle. The chances are good that those people who led the resistance and are now the de facto rulers, that if they do not, maybe they will not remain in the same combination. But the major factions of that, they should be given a little better chances to prevail. Not that it's going to be inevitable that they will, but the chances are that they will.
Okay.
Rishabh, just right now, there is so much that has been talked about. I think one point was raised by someone, and for me, it's very important because right now we were talking about the humanitarian aid. Whenever the time came for providing aid, the first people on ground, whether it was earthquake or flood in Pakistan or problems elsewhere in another country, these were the NGOs, these were the jihadis, these were the people who were usually dubbed as, the Islamists and the potential of terrorism. They are the ones who had always prepared themselves. They are the ones who reached there.
Okay.
Stopping them from doing this work will be a great disservice to the Afghan people.
Okay.
And I'm not talking politics.
Okay, right. And we shall not be talking about politics today, but humanitarian crisis. And finally, Dr. Mashallah Shakir Sahab has unmuted himself. Mashallah Shakir Sahab, would you like to shed light on today's topic, that humanitarian crisis in Afghanistan?
Well, assalamu alaikum to you and to other audience. I don't know if you are hearing me clearly, but I should apologize because I could not really join you in deliberations. I've been discharged from hospital 2 days ago, but the thing has been of very important to me, and I'm thankful that you have informed me. The issue of crisis in Afghanistan, I think, has got different dimensions. But the most important dimension of that is the crisis or the social crisis in Afghanistan, which has to be dealt very carefully by all the neighbors on top and other interesting countries, including the OIC members. Pakistan is an important neighbor to Afghanistan, but has been hosting a number of, millions of the refugees from years ago. And now the number of them has obviously increased. And Pakistan could be a passage for the passage of the humanitarian aid to Afghanistan as well. So Pakistan is playing the very important role. So I can equalize the role of Iran as well, because we have been in partnership with Afghanistan, irrespective of the government's ruling in Kabul from the time of from the post crisis in Afghanistan, post-Soviet regime in Afghanistan, and till now. And we have been hosting a number of refugees from Afghanistan. But the difference between, a very acute difference between the Iran and Pakistanis, many refugees who infiltrate into Iran, either legally, lawfully, or unlawfully, they do not have their final destination as Iran to be. but they want to pass through Iran and go farther towards the other countries. So we are facing a dilemma, a different dilemma. Either we have to host them, accommodate them, manage them, settle them, and many other issues, or otherwise they would by some means infiltrate into other neighboring countries towards the west. So we have got an agenda of double tier. One is to manage the refugees, newly entered refugees, plus already settled refugees in Iran, and to stop their way into the other countries from our western border. So in that case, we require an international attention towards us, because our capacities may not be suffice to really handle this multidimensional issue. I'm sorry for being a bit talkative, and I hope my input to this webinar has been of some help. Thank you so much.
Okay, thank you very much, Dr. Mashallah Shakir Saab. Despite not being very well and suffering from some health issues, you participated in the webinar. I'm really obliged for your participation and your comments. And definitely, I heard the news that one non-governmental organization of a political party of in Pakistan has sent 3 trucks of medicines yesterday to Afghanistan, and some other aid is also in process. And definitely, certainly, we need international focus and the bulk aid to Afghanistan, and of course they also need money to pay salaries to there. So in such a condition, when the humanitarian crisis is not trending in the Western media, what shall we do? Because this is one part of the efforts that this webinar is. Definitely, it would be somewhere in the international media and the national media as well. What could else be done? Zoon, being media professional from China, what do you suggest that what we should do? You said it is in the Chinese media as well, and China is putting all the efforts to mainstream and make it hashtag in China and other parts of the world. What else could be done, Zoon? Sorry. Please unmute yourself. Yeah.
Munir Saab, first of all, I think all of us have learned a lot from this conversation. I honestly think we are taking steps in the right direction. We could have more mobilization. We could, for instance, I think what the OIC did essentially, it has been covered multiple times in global media. This in itself played a role in highlighting the issue of the suffering of Afghan people. Okay. One of the other things, for instance, when we have these kind of webinars, there are voices in Western communities that are talking about the humanitarian situation, but they're not being mainstreamized. So maybe in these kind of conversations, engaging those voices from the Western countries as well, engaging international actors that when they attend these kind of events, they will be covering it. And that can maybe mobilize what we want to really talk about this issue more effectively. Then how we cover Afghanistan, unfortunately, as I mentioned, and many other people mentioned, has been politicized. One of the things that a few months ago we started talking about was that it's one thing to talk about recognizing a government and the political side of it, but it's quite another thing to really conceive more innovative ways to help Afghan people. These are 2 different conversations, and the latter one needs to be done in a more effective way. So maybe engaging different voices from different parts of the world in such conversations can play a role. Countries in the region have a direct stake in the short term and the long term. So when we do these kind of events, we can maybe make more of an effort to engage global voices. And highlighting the current situation can switch the topics that people are focusing on vis-a-vis Afghanistan. So these are small efforts. instead of just blaming, instead of, obviously we should critically understand what expected outcomes of different initiatives were, what could have been achieved, and what has been achieved is a bit less than that. So I really appreciate, for example, General Assad's comment that yes, more could have been done through the summit. And this is something we should openly talk about. But at the same time, utilizing that as an opportunity to, again, highlight the issues that need to be addressed is important. So these are small things. I think we have, for instance, media collaborations, journalists working with each other in different countries, having better access to Afghan people on the ground, knowing their stories, knowing their suffering, and covering it directly is also important. So small steps in the right direction, maybe. And switching the issue from political to humanitarian is just the most vital right now.
Okay. Thank you, Zoon. Switching from a political to humanitarian aspect of Afghanistan, Ambassador Rakesh Sood, do you think, like, despite having some political differences and strategic differences with Afghanistan, would you pursue some media projection of humanitarian crisis, or like you would ask the Indian influencers in the media to put it up the humanitarian angle into the Western media? Ambassador Rakesh.
Munir Saab, I think the humanitarian crisis has been adequately played out. I frankly think that there is considerable divergence in terms of the expectations that people have from the Taliban government, both in the region and elsewhere. So I'm very realistic in terms of what is possible. We can keep talking about humanitarian this thing, but frankly, the West doesn't give a damn about humanitarian. Their interest is in blocking refugees. If that takes a bit of money, fine, they'll deliver that money. The rest of it is for the region to figure out how to deal with it, because the countries of the region were in the forefront of demanding that the West get out. And frankly, the West had made so many mistakes that they didn't have any other options. So it is good in a sense that they left. But if we can't overcome our differences to deal with the humanitarian crisis, then I'm afraid that will be the case. As far as India is concerned, as I mentioned earlier, there is a fair bit of coverage about developments in Afghanistan in Indian media, both on print media as well as in the audiovisual media. And the humanitarian crisis does get a lot of coverage. So, which is why the government, despite having closed its embassy and not having had any contacts with the Taliban, except the very peripheral contacts in Doha, was felt compelled to provide the humanitarian assistance. And my guess is, as I mentioned earlier, the government is unlikely to be in a hurry to go back and reopen the embassy in Kabul, given its history with the Haqqani network. And but if it feels that, yes, the humanitarian crisis is creating more difficulties, then yes, the government will probably try and add to whatever it has already provided in terms of humanitarian assistance. But more than that, I think the differences within the region are fundamental. And my guess is that these differences are only going to grow, because that is why I posed the question that I did. I mean, I thought maybe General Durrani Saab might respond to that, but perhaps we will have another private chat about it.
Okay.
About the Islamist Pashtun and the nationalist Pashtun and how that plays out in, both domestically in Pakistan and the rest of, because I think that that remains a fundamental issue on how to deal with it.
Okay. General Durrani, would you like to respond to the last comment of Ambassador Rakesh?
How could I not? How could I not? Rakesh is an old
Please
friend.
Go ahead.
Very old
Please go
friend,
ahead.
very old. And I'm so glad that he's with us on so many fronts. But I'll try to be a little diplomatic in trying to give him the answer. That is his field. Mine was, more direct. But I'll diplomatically say that one must have noticed around the world that the non-state actors are usually more effective than the governments, even in fighting, like Hezbollah or the Taliban. But also, whenever you need something to be done, the government would be well advised to get out of the way. In Pakistan, I can tell you, there are people who are waiting. They keep asking us, how do we now reach out to them? How do we provide help? We have blankets ready, we have food. Medicine, of course, is going because of the initiative by pharmaceutical firms, not because of any government patronage. This is going. So similarly, if they were to just let people know who all are available, the IDs and all, I don't think after that, I'm going to be worried about what decisions they take, whether they'll hold high-level meetings, whether they are mobilized. I mean, this is the type of thing that always gets thrown to you. We've had a meeting, oh, for heaven's sake, there is work to be done, and they say, we've had a meeting. Now, this is the usual stock answer from the government. So, Rakesh, I suppose you and me, if they give us the task, and Modi and Imran and others get out of the way, we will take care of it.
Okay, that's great. That's it. And I also believe in the non-state actors, because they always had played wonderful role instead of the governments. One thing, Asad Durrani Saab and Rakesh Saab also, and other speakers can also take on it. The Taliban have given like a shut-up call to all those who are asking inclusive government and taking all other groups into. These are like who they are to advise us or to ask us to have inclusive government. So, so far we don't see any such movement there. Do you believe they would be taking other groups into for their acceptance and recognition by the world? Durrani Saab.
Other groups, in due course of time, we have seen that the Taliban, when they were resisting, it's not only the Pashtuns. When they went in the north, they did integrate some of the non-Pashtuns by administering well, not by any other means, not by force. And so some have joined. I've already said that right now, for them to carry out that sort of expansion may not be very easy because of their own internal unity. But there is also another one. Come on, if you keep hammering this thing into the Taliban, you must include others and you must, they will not do it because this is the old Afghan tradition. You cannot push an Afghan even into heaven, but you can lure him into hell. Now, that is something that we used to say whenever we were dealing with them. So the best is say, it's your country, you do it, and you know what is best. And I think not now, 6 months or a couple of years later, they would. Otherwise, the government will not function. We found that out a long time ago, after the Soviet withdrawal. That, unless it became an exclusive government, the term used was broad-based government at that time. We reached out to Kabul, to Zahir Shah, to the diaspora, someone mentioned it, trying to get this type of an all-inclusive government. It will take time. Don't push them right now, and certainly do not create conditions. And if you do not do that, we will not do it. By imposing certain preconditions, we've already actually forced them to do something that they may not have done otherwise. Blowing up of the Buddha statues was one example.
Okay, thank you, Durrani Saab. Dr. Sumaya Murawati.
Thank you so much. I want to mention one point and add some points about Taliban. Mr. Ambassador mentioned about the new Afghan group. I think we have to mention one point. The exist of Taliban group, the extremist group in Afghanistan. As you know, most of the Taliban or other extremist group in Afghanistan be with Taliban because of money. in some parts of time, if the Taliban don't send money and gather their benefit, they can be joined to another group. So I think because Taliban have some different dimension and some different problem and priority at this time. So Taliban have to establish the power in Kabul. So maybe some parts of Taliban, as you know, in the first month when Taliban go to Kabul, some parts of Taliban have a problem and power competition with them. So I think it is happened in Afghanistan, and because of the data we hear from our friend in Afghanistan, we have to wait for some, apart from Taliban, and it is the extremist group. But the other important point, it's benefit. So if Taliban can't answer and gather their benefit, so maybe they join to Daesh, maybe joined to another new group. And another point I want to mention that the extremist group gathered under the Taliban to make Taliban have a victory in Afghanistan. We have another scenario, and it is really important. If another extremist group, some, for example, 10 other group, understand and speak about another new goal, maybe in Central Asia, maybe in China or other parts of the world, and find another goal gathered on one group's flag. For example, maybe Harakat Islami from Uzbekistan or from Jamaat Islami from Tajikistan. And this group helped that extremist group to be victory in Uzbekistan, Turkmenistan, or Uzbekistan. So I think when we talk about Taliban members in Afghanistan, we have to understand and mention that they aren't all the Pashtun, Afghan Pashtun. They are international group, or regional groups. So the most important thing, it's money, benefit, and geopolitical point. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you, Dr. Sumaya Amravati, for your additional point. I think we have to be very optimistic about the humanitarian aid to Afghanistan, whatever the conflicts or the contradictory points we have in our political and strategic interventions. Pakistan's Foreign Minister, Shah Mahmood Qureshi, has already given government's resolve to support all kind of support. If someone is interested to send humanitarian aid to Afghanistan, Pakistan government will be supporting it. This is what I have read in the newspaper. And I believe if any neighboring country is interested, or the other countries are interested to send humanitarian aid to Afghanistan, Pakistan will be supporting it. And definitely we have to put this appeal to international media. And after having UN Security Council approved resolution for humanitarian aid to Afghanistan, I believe the Western media and the Western other agencies and the countries would be supporting it. With this, I would like to thank Lieutenant General retired Muhammad Asad Durrani Sahab and Ambassador retired Nagmana Hashmi Sahaba and Ambassador retired Rakesh Sood from India, and Dr. Abdullah Khanjani Sahab from Afghanistan, Dr. Sumaya Amravati from Iran, Zoon Ahmed Khan from Beijing for joining us, and those Dr. Najm Abbas Sahab. Also, I just saw your name on the screen. You joined us from London. And Mashallah Shakri Sahab, thank you so much. I'm grateful despite having some health problems. You joined us from Tehran, and other friends who joined us from different parts of country and other world. And with this, I once again pay my gratitude to the participants and say a Merry Christmas to those who are celebrating it, and Junaz Kai, and I believe Pakistan's founders, the teachings and their speeches and their statements will be a light for us to be a solid and helpful nation to others. With this, thank you very much. Stay tuned for our next webinar next week, next Saturday, inshallah. Thank you very much.